Now, let's try to write a few sentences based on maybe a real example. And to do this, I am going to show you a sample chart here, and we're going to try to write a few sentences describing different things, really. So sometimes we want to describe an increase, sometimes we want to describe a decrease, or sometimes we want to describe maybe a fluctuation, perhaps. So let's start with this line here. Okay, so I have this line, which corresponds to this variable, and I'm going to write a sentence using my structures. So it's a decrease. I have a number of options. Remember, we had starting with the verb, starting with, so we have verb phrase construction, and then we have a structure that includes a noun phrase structure. Let's start with the verb phrase structure. So remember, the structure was subject, verb phrase, adverb. Pretty easy, right? And we're going to use the color coding again, because I know this is going to be helpful to many of you out there. So verb phrase, and then the adverb will be coded as well. Okay, so let's do this step by step. The subject, it's the number of students. Remember the MP core, we previously identified it. And so we're going to say the number of students. Now, is it any students? No, it's students enrolled in hard science majors. So I'm going to say that. I'm going to say enrolled in hard science majors. So sometimes you need to specify the MP. We're not referring to the number of students. We're referring to the number of students in one category. So you have to specify that category. Sometimes students forget and they end up writing sentences that are really meaningless, because when you say the number of students increased or decreased, which group, right? So you need to be specific. The number of students in hard science majors. Okay, so I need a verb. I can use decreased, declined, fell, dropped, right? Any of the verbs that we looked at before. I'm just going to use decreased. Now, did it decrease by a lot, or did it decrease very sharply? No, it kind of happened gradually. So I'm going to use the adverb gradually. So the number of students enrolled in hard science majors decreased gradually. Now I'm going to mention the amount and the time. Which one comes first? The amount should come first. So I'm going to say from over 10,000, right? To how much? From over 10,000 to above 8,000, right? Above 8,000. So I mentioned the amounts, and then I need to mention the time, from 1965 to 2005. Now I've already used from to, so I'm going to use between now. So between 1965 and 2005. Right? There you go. So let's use the color coding. The number of students enrolled in hard science majors will serve as my subject. Decreased gradually is my verb phrase. And from over 10,000 to above 8,000 between 1965 and 2005, these are all my my adverbs, right? Okay, what if I want to use the other structure and I want to create some variety? So this time I'm going to say from 1965 to 2005. Notice what I'm doing. I'm starting my sentence with the adverb this time. Okay? Now, I'm going to use the other structure, which was the noun phrase structure. What was that like? So there, remember we had there was, and then you add the noun phrase, and then you add in, the subject comes next, and the adverb appears at the end. So if we want to color code again, we have yellow. The noun phrase, we're going to highlight in, I believe it was purple. In is yellow. Subject is green. And then the adverb at the end will go with the same color we've been using consistently. Okay, so from 1965 to 2005, this is my adverb. Okay, so this is the color I'm using. Then I'm going to say there was, right? This is the fixed expression. This is yellow. It's just something that we need to repeat in the structure. There was, and now I have to mention what it was. So here we had decreased gradually. So I have to come up with a noun. I could say decrease, fall, decline. So I'm going to say there was a decline. And then here we had gradually, which was an adverb that went into our into our verb phrase construction. Here, instead of gradually, maybe I could say there was a gradual decline, or there was a slow decline. It really doesn't matter as long as it accurately describes what you see in the data. So what are we going to use as for color coding this? It is our noun phrase, and so we're going to color code it in purple. Next, we're going to say in. That's going to be another fixed part of our response, so we're going to use the same color. And then the subject, in the number of students. Any students? No. In the number of students enrolled in hard science majors, right? And then I mentioned from 10,000 to above 8,000. And I believe it was from over 10,000. So I'll keep that constant. So the number of students enrolled in hard science majors, this is my subject. And then from over 10,000 to above 8,000, that's my adverb, right? So what I just did is I described this line using two structures. First, the subject verb adverb structure, and then next using the noun phrase structure that you could see here. Okay, but what if I want to describe a period where there was no change? Let's take this part of the chart, right? So this is related to medicine. It's from 1995 to 2005. There was no change at below 8,000, right? Okay, so what structure are we going to use for this? Well, let's go back. We have this structure, and these were the verb phrases that we could use. So our structure is very similar. It can be very similar to the verb phrase construction that we've seen before, and it can also be similar to the noun phrase construction. It's really up to you. We'll start with the verb phrase construction, right? So here is the structure, and now we're going to describe the change, or maybe the lack of change, really. So let's start with the subject. The number of students enrolled in medicine, right? So this time we were using a different line to describe this period of stability. Now, you could say the number of students enrolled in medicine. So sometimes the category is mentioned after the noun. So students enrolled in medicine. Enrolled in medicine is the post modifier explaining the noun. Sometimes you treat it as an adverb. So instead of saying the number of students enrolled in medicine, you could say the number of medical students. Then we need to mention the verb phrase. Now remember, there was no change, right? So what we could say is basically the number of medical students remained unchanged right? That's the verb phrase. And then we need to mention the time and the amount. At below 8,000 from, and what was the period? It was from 1995 to 2005. So from 1995 to 2005. So if we color code this, the number of medical students is the subject. Remained unchanged is the verb phrase, really. At below 8,000 is the first part of our adverb, reflecting the quantity. And then from 1995 to 2005 is the second part of our adverb corresponding to the time period, right? Okay, so what if I want to use the other structure for describing no change at all? So the way you would do this is this time you would use this structure, and then you would use a noun phrase such as no change, period of stability, or little change. So let me show you how this is done. We're going to change the same sentence and transform it into this noun phrase style of expression. So this time we're going to say there was a period of stability. Or we could just say there was no change in the number of medical students, right? From 1995 to 2005. Now, you may have noticed that I dropped the below 8,000. And if I wanted to mention it, I would have to mention it, here. Exactly at below 8,000, right here. But remember, again, as I mentioned before, what we should do is we should learn to get rid of any information that might be contextually understandable. What do I mean by this? So if in the previous sentence we mentioned that the number of students reached 8,000 in 1995, and then we say there was no change in the number of students from 1995 to 2005, it's obvious that the amount was stable at 8,000 because we mentioned it reached 8,000 in 1995. So if after 1995 it remained stable, it will have remained stable at that certain amount that was mentioned. So, sometimes it's redundant. In this case, let's color code. There was is part of the structure. No change is the noun phrase that we're using here. In is part of the structure, so we're going to highlight that in yellow. The number of medical students, what is that? That's the subject, isn't it? So it's going to be green. And then from 1995 to 2005, we'll highlight that in blue, as always. Okay, so we've done a sample increase, decrease. We did like one decrease. We've done a period of stability. Now we want to mention a peak, how it reaches a peak. Very quickly, we're going to review the structure first, and then I'll show you how you could write this. So the structure is basically subject, verb, adverb, and these are the verb phrases. So we have reached a peak, reach a high point, reach a low point, and bottom out. So let's see. This is the structure. And note, I'm going to describe this part of the chart. So this is the peak that I'm describing. It is in engineering majors, and it happens in the year 1975, right? And it's over 10,000. Okay, let's see if we can remember all these details. So I'm going to start my sentence with the adverb. So the time, in 1975. In 1975. Okay, and don't forget the comma. Remember, every time you begin a sentence with an adverb, you place a comma after it. So in 1975, the number of engineering students, okay, so here we have the adverb, we have the subject, and now we want to say that it hit the roof. So I'm going to say reached a peak of I would think it was over 10,000, if I'm not mistaken. So let's just double check real quick. Yes, it was over 10,000, and it happened in 1975, and it corresponds to engineering students. So it looks like it's correct. So in 1975, the number of engineering students reached a peak of over 10,000, and that's it. So in 1975, I'll highlight that in blue. The number of engineering students is my subject. I'm going to highlight that in green. Reached a peak is my, basically my verb phrase structure. Of over 10,000 is the other part of my adverb. It's the quantity, right? So here we also reviewed an example of how you could describe a peak. And finally, the last structure that we're going to practice pertains to, you got it, describing a point in the data. And so we can talk about any point, we can talk about a starting point, or we can talk about where it eventually landed. So let's take a look at this one. We haven't done arts and humanities, right? And so let's say we want to mention this end point, how in 2005 it reaches below 6%. So it's going to be very similar to what I just said. But let's copy the structure anyway. So the structure is once again subject, verb, phrase, adverb. Okay, so subject, verb, phrase, adverb. And let's start with the subject. So the number of students registered in arts and humanities majors. Okay, what do you think? So the number of students enrolled in arts and humanities majors. Notice I could have said the number of arts and humanities students. Remember, sometimes you can use it as an adjective coming before the NP, the head NP. Sometimes it appears after. And so sometimes you can only do one. Keep that in mind. Sometimes only one option is possible, but it's always a good idea to play around with these structures if you can. All right, so far we have the subject down. So the number of students registered in arts and humanities majors, this is gonna have to be in green. And then what am I gonna say? I'm gonna mention my verb phrase. So finally reached. And then what was the number? Under 6,000. So under 6,000. And then what was the year? In 2005. Okay, so we have the subject. Finally reached is my verb phrase. So remember, highlight that in purple. And then under 6,000, it's quantity in 2005. Let's read it. The number of students registered in arts and humanities majors finally reached under 6,000 or below 6,000 in 2005. If you enjoyed this video, please do me a favor, like, subscribe, and share this link with other people who may find this content useful. As always, thank you all for watching, and I'll catch you all in the next one.